On a quiet Friday morning in Tennessee, a Muslim man walked up to a statue of the Virgin Mary, poured urine across her sacred face, and smirked as if daring heaven to respond. But heaven did respond. Before the liquid even reached the foot of the statue, the man's right hand burst into a burning agony from the inside out. No flames, no smoke, no injury. Doctors would later say, "We have no category for this." Priests would whisper, "This is not punishment, this is revelation." And skeptics? For once, they fell silent. That moment, 9:46 a.m., November 14th, 2025, turned the peaceful town of St. Gabriel Springs into a battleground between the natural and the supernatural. Earlier that morning, everything had been ordinary. Kids laughed at the bus stop. The smell of cinnamon rolls drifted from Walker's Bakery. A leaf blower hummed near the church steps. And the 90-year-old Virgin Mary statue, carved from pale Tennessee limestone, stood in her usual place, arms open gently, as if cradling the whole town. Witnesses noticed the man entering the park, but none sensed what was coming. A jogger slowed down, thinking he looked lost. A florist across the street thought he might be praying. A retired Marine felt an odd tension, like the air was holding its breath. Then the man lifted the bottle. The splash was quick, filthy, almost unreal. Gasps broke out. A mother pushed her stroller away. An elderly man whispered, "Lord have mercy." 3 seconds passed. 3 seconds of absolute silence. Then came the scream. It wasn't loud, it was primal, like a soul being torn open. The man clutched his right hand, eyes wide with terror, while the crowd watched in frozen disbelief. Because his hand looked perfectly normal. But something impossible had already started. Long before the scream that shook St. Gabriel Springs, the man at the center of it all, Imran Malik, had been quietly unraveling in ways no one around him fully saw. To his co-workers at the delivery warehouse, Imran was the kind of man who showed up early, spoke little, and never complained, even during 12-hour shifts. His manager described him as steady, almost too steady, like someone carrying weight he refused to set down. The older drivers noticed how he avoided conversations about family. The younger ones thought he was just shy. No one guessed how deeply the past 2 years had carved him open. Neighbors on Cedar Ridge Lane remembered the day he and his wife Layla moved into the small rental house in 2020. She smiled politely at everyone. He nodded silently, eyes cautious but hopeful. They were newly arrived from Jordan, trying to rebuild a life in a country that promised safety, opportunity, and a chance to start over after a painful miscarriage back home. But that hope dissolved in 2023 when Layla lost another pregnancy. After that night in the emergency room, the couple stopped speaking about children altogether. Grief settled over their home like dust. Not loud, not dramatic, just ever-present. Layla tried to reach Im, but Imran drifted further inward. She would later recall how he sat on the couch for hours without turning on the TV, staring into a silence she could not enter. At work, he pushed himself harder. At the mosque, he prayed less. Friends said he began skipping gatherings, claiming overtime, even on days he wasn't scheduled. Yet the weight pressing on him wasn't just personal loss. It was the feeling of being invisible in America. The stares at the grocery store, the quiet tension whenever news about the Middle East hit the headlines, the subtle hesitations when he introduced himself, all of it built slowly, like a storm forming far offshore. And by early November 2025, something inside Imran had shifted subtly, dangerously. A bitterness he didn't recognize had begun to take root. A bitterness that would lead him, step by step, toward the statue in the park. By the fall of 2025, something inside Imran Malik had begun to darken, so quietly that even those closest to him mistook it for exhaustion. But beneath the surface, a slow, grinding anger was forming, shaped not by hatred of others, but by the heavy, unspoken grief he carried. Co-workers noticed the first signs before Layla did. Imran flinched when he passed hospital maternity ads on delivery routes. He avoided the pediatric wing entirely. A fellow driver recalled how, one afternoon, Imran stared at a mother lifting her toddler from a car seat, his jaw clenched so tightly it trembled. Yet the strangest shift came when he began reacting to symbols he had ignored for years. At first, it was just the Sunday church bells echoing across town. They jarred him awake on his only day off, and he muttered that they pierced straight into his skull. Later, at a gas station, he stiffened at the sight of a rosary dangling from a truck's mirror. And at the warehouse, he quietly asked to avoid delivery routes near the Catholic school, even though no one understood why. But the Virgin Mary statue in the town square was what truly unsettled him. It was impossible to avoid. A 9-foot stone figure standing beneath yellowing autumn trees, her arms open, expression gentle and sorrowful. For decades, she had watched over parades, farmers' markets, and Christmas caroling. Residents barely noticed her anymore. Imran noticed her every time. He changed his walking route to avoid the park, but Street Gabriel Springs was too small. Somehow, every errand, every shortcut, every detour still led him past the statue. At first, he looked away. Then he glared. Then he stopped altogether, just to stare at her face, as if searching for the reason his life had fractured. A neighbor later said she once saw Im standing alone in the cold, whispering something under his breath. She thought he was praying. He wasn't. The bitterness inside Im was beginning to look for a target, and the statue had become its focal point. By early November 2025, the tension inside Imran Malik had reached a point where even the smallest moments seemed to crack Im open. Those around Im sensed something was wrong, but no one understood how close he was to unraveling. Layla noticed it first. Some nights she would wake to find Imran sitting at the edge of the bed, shoulders hunched, staring into the darkness as if waiting for an answer that refused to come. When she spoke his name, he didn't turn. When she touched his arm, he stiffened like a man bracing for impact. She later described Im as present in the room, but gone somewhere far away. At the warehouse, his co-workers whispered about his sudden outbursts of silence. A friend asked if he was okay. Imran didn't respond, just closed his locker gently, as if any louder movement might cause something inside Im to shatter. Even his supervisor, a man known for bluntness, approached Im softly one morning and said, "You look like you're carrying something too heavy, brother." Imran forced a smile that fooled no one. But the most telling shift came from within the community. The imam at the local mosque noticed Imran avoiding Friday prayers. When he finally appeared one evening, he sat in the back corner, head down, unmoving. After service, the imam approached Im with concern. Imran simply said, "I don't belong anywhere anymore," then walked out before the imam could respond. The town itself reflected his inner turmoil. Each time he passed the Virgin Mary statue, he felt a tightening in his chest, an emotion he couldn't name. Resentment, envy, accusation, even he couldn't tell. But he kept returning to it in his mind, replaying old wounds, searching for someone or something to hold responsible for the pain that consumed him. By November 13th, the weight of grief, alienation, and unspoken anger had fused into something volatile. He wasn't planning an act of hatred. He was imply, a man breaking apart, and broken men, left alone long enough, often choose the wrong place to aim their suffering. The morning of November 14th, 2025 arrived colder than usual in Street Gabriel Springs, the kind of cold that clings to the pavement before sunrise. Most residents described it as ordinary, a still, quiet Friday. But for Imran Malik, something inside Im had already snapped long before dawn. Layla remembered waking up to the sound of the front door closing softly. No goodbye, no explanation, just the sound of a man slipping out of his own life. She assumed he was heading to work early. She didn't see the empty look in his eyes as he walked past their car, or the plastic bottle tucked beneath his jacket. At the warehouse, his supervisor waited for Im to clock in. He never did. Security footage later showed Imran driving out of the industrial district at 9:12 a.m., hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles whitened. Investigators would say he looked unlike himself, calm in a way that didn't match the storm inside each IM. Witnesses at the park first saw Im around 9:40. A groundskeeper sweeping leaves thought Imran looked lost. A retired couple sitting on a bench noticed Im standing unusually still across from the Virgin Mary statue. He looked like a man waiting for a verdict, the husband recalled. But what struck everyone was his face, expressionless, drained, as if he wasn't fully present in his own body. Then came the moment no one could forget. Imran reached into his jacket, pulled out the plastic bottle, and unscrewed the cap with trembling fingers. A teenager across the square paused his skateboard mid-roll, sensing something wrong. The elderly couple leaned forward. The groundskeeper stopped sweeping altogether. Imran stepped closer to the statue, too close, and in one swift, irreversible motion poured the liquid across the Virgin Mary's face. It dripped down her stone cheeks, across her robes, and onto the pedestal below. Gasps pierced the air. A mother grabbed her child's hand. Someone shouted, "Stop! What are you doing?" But Imran did not move. For one haunting second, he simply stared at what he had done. Then the consequences began. For a single breath, the park fell silent, in eerie, suspended quiet that witnesses would later struggle to describe. The liquid was still sliding down the Virgin Mary's stone robes when the first spark of something unexplainable ignited inside Imran Malik's right hand. Second one, a faint tingle. Imran blinked, confused, flexing his fingers as if shaking off a pins and needles sensation. Second two, the tingle surged into a heat that shouldn't have been possible. His eyes widened. A teenager watching from across the square saw his posture snap rigid, like someone touched a live wire. Second three, the heat detonated into agony. Imran screamed. Not a startled shout of primal, tearing howl that sliced through the morning air and froze every witness where they stood. People rushed forward but stopped short, horrified by what they saw and what they didn't. There were no flames, no smoke, no discoloration. His skin was perfectly intact, yet he clutched his right hand as if it were being consumed by fire. A woman near the fountain dropped her coffee cup, ceramic shattering across the pavement. A jogger dialed 911 with shaking fingers. The retired Marine stepped forward, instincts kicking in, but even he hesitated, later admitting, "I've seen battlefield injuries. But this looked like a man being burned alive by nothing." Imran collapsed to his knees, cradling his hand against his chest. His breath came in short, panicked gasps. His left hand gripped his wrist so tightly his knuckles went white. "Make it stop, please, please," he shouted. But no one knew how to help. A mother shielded her child's eyes. The groundskeeper murmured a prayer under his breath. Someone whispered, "This isn't natural." And still, his hand looked normal. Perfectly normal. But the pain only intensified. Imran writhed on the cold pavement, tears streaking down his face, screaming for a relief that would not come. By the time the ambulance arrived, one thing was certain. Whatever was happening to him, Sevenam, was happening from inside. By the time the ambulance doors burst open at Street Gabriel Medical Center, the paramedics were already shaken. One of them, a 10-year veteran, later said, "I've seen chemical burns, electrical burns, frostbite, you name it. But I've never seen someone scream like that with a hand that looks perfect." Inside Trauma Room 3, chaos collided with confusion. Nurses cut away Imran's jacket so they could examine the arm. His right hand trembled violently, but the skin was unmarked. No redness, no swelling, no moisture from chemicals. It looked like a healthy hand attached to a man in unbearable pain. Dr. Harris, the attending emergency physician, checked the vitals. Heart rate, dangerously high. Blood pressure, surging. Skin temperature, normal. Visible injury, none. When the nurse administered morphine, the strongest opioid available, everyone expected at least a small reduction in pain. Instead, Imran screamed louder, arching off the gurney as if the medication itself had turned to gasoline on an invisible fire. "Turn it off," he begged. "It burns, it burns." Another nurse tried cooling packs, thinking maybe nerve inflammation was at play. The moment the ice touched his skin, Imran convulsed, shouting that the cold made the fire sharper. They pulled the pack away immediately. Nothing made sense. Dr. Harris called for a neurologist, then a toxicologist, then a burn specialist. One by one, they examined him and stepped back in disbelief. This isn't a burn. This isn't neurological. This isn't chemical. This shouldn't be possible. In the hallway, staff whispered theories. Unseen toxins, nerve disorders, even psychological collapse. But each theory died the moment someone looked at the sheer terror in Imran's eyes. This wasn't imagined. This was real. At 3:40 p.m., his wife Layla rushed through the doors, breathless and trembling. When she saw Imran curled into a fetal position on the hospital bed, hands shaking uncontrollably, she sobbed, "What's happening to Im? What is doing this?" No one had an answer. For the first time in his career, Dr. Harris admitted, We're not dealing with medicine anymore. By nightfall, the hospital room had settled into an exhausted quiet. The monitors beeped steadily, the fluorescent lights hummed softly, and nurses passed by the doorway with cautious glances, as if afraid the man inside might erupt again in those horrifying screams. But sometime around 11:14 p.m., everything changed. Imran had been whimpering for hours, the pain never easing, only shifting in intensity like waves of fire rolling beneath his skin. Layla sat beside him, clutching his left hand, whispering prayers through tears she could no longer hold back. Then, without warning, Imran went silent. His breathing steadied, his body relaxed. The tension that had gripped him all day loosened as if an unseen hand had been lifted from his chest. Layla looked up, terrified that he'd lost consciousness. But Imran's eyes were wide open, fixed on something in the far corner of the room. She followed his gaze. There was nothing there. But Imran's voice trembled with a clarity she hadn't heard from him in months. "Do you see her?" he whispered. Layla's heart pounded. "See who?" "The woman in blue." His eyes shone, not with fear, but with a strange awe. "She's standing right there, the same face as the statue, but alive." Layla turned to call a nurse, but stopped when she saw the expression on her husband's face. Soft, broken, reverent. Not a hallucination of terror, but something closer to recognition. Imran's breath hitched as he began to cry. "She's not angry," he said. "She's sad. Sad for me." For nearly 10 minutes, he spoke into the empty air, confessing the weight he carried, the child he lost, the loneliness that devoured him, and the bitterness he couldn't release. Tears fell freely, as his voice cracked with every apology he didn't know he needed to say. Layla could only watch, trembling. And though the corner appeared empty, she later admitted something she never told the doctors. The room felt full, like someone gentle had entered. Outside, the wind rose against the windows. Inside, something unseen had begun to shift. By sunrise on November 15th, Street Gabriel Springs was no longer the quiet Tennessee town it had been 24 hours earlier. The story spread faster than anyone could have predicted. What began as whispers among witnesses in the park had exploded into a wildfire of speculation, outrage, fear, and curiosity. At the local diner, patrons crowded around a small TV broadcasting the first breaking news segment. The headline crawled across the screen. "Muslim man desecrates Virgin Mary statue, suffers mysterious internal burning." Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others crossed themselves. A few muttered that it had to be a hoax, until videos recorded by teenagers at the park began circulating online. By mid-morning, the parking lot outside Street Gabriel Medical Center was packed with news vans. Reporters argued over who would get the first angle, while cameramen scanned the streets for anyone willing to talk. A nurse stepping out for a break was swarmed immediately. "I can't say anything," she insisted, though her frightened expression said enough. Religious communities reacted just as swiftly. At St. Matthew's Catholic Church, Father John Matthews addressed a crowd that had doubled overnight. "We don't yet know what happened," he said carefully, "but we must respond with prayer, not hostility." Across town, members of the Muslim community gathered outside the small mosque, worried that the incident would ignite backlash. Their imam pleaded with the press, "This man's suffering does not represent our faith." Meanwhile, online forums erupted with theories. Some claimed divine intervention. Some argued it was psychosomatic. Others insisted it was staged. But none of the theories matched the intensity of the recordings. Imran screaming, clutching a hand that looked uninjured, yet somehow burned him from the inside. At the center of it all, Layla stood in the hospital hallway, overwhelmed by the cameras outside and the chaos inside. Her only thought was whether her husband would survive the night. But as the noise in the world rose to a fever pitch, something else was stirring quietly, steadily. The town wasn't just reacting to a scandal. It was bracing for a miracle it didn't yet understand. By the morning of November 16th, the tension in Street Gabriel Springs had reached a breaking point. Rumors swirled through the town like cold wind. Some claimed Imran was dying, others insisted he had gone mad. But what no one expected was the decision Imran himself made that day. Just after 10 a.m., he signed his own discharge papers with his trembling left hand. Nurses protested. Layla begged him to stay, but Imran said only one sentence, barely above a whisper, I need to go back. Minutes later, Layla pushed his wheelchair through the hospital's sliding doors, the autumn light washing over them both. Outside, a crowd had already formed, hundreds of residents, reporters, parishioners, skeptics, and strangers drawn by something they couldn't explain. People fell quiet as the couple approached, parting instinctively to create a narrow path leading to the square. At the front stood Father John Matthews. He stepped aside, clearing the way. "Go," he said softly. "Truth is waiting for you." Imran rose slowly from the wheelchair, unsteady but determined. Every step toward the Virgin Mary statue looked painful, even without the invisible flame still raging inside his right hand. Layla stayed close, one hand on his back. Witnesses later said the moment felt otherworldly, as if the air itself had thickened around the square. Even the fountain seemed to hush. When Imran reached the base of the statue, he sank to his knees. His voice broke. Immediately. "I don't ask for forgiveness," he said, tears falling into the stone. "I ask to be seen. Not as a monster, not as an enemy, just as a man who is broken." He confessed the things he had never spoken aloud. His grief, his bitterness, his feeling that God had abandoned him. The crowd stood motionless, their breaths caught in their throats. And then, in one impossible instant, it happened. Imran gasped, staring at his right hand. He flexed his fingers. The pain, constant, consuming, unbearable, vanished. Not gradually, not gently, but completely. A miracle had just unfolded in front of an entire town. The moment Imran's pain disappeared, the crowd erupted, some crying, some praying, others imply stunned into silence. But for the doctors at St. Gabriel Medical Center, the real shock began hours later, when Imran returned for a full evaluation. Dr. Harris, still shaken from the previous day, led the examination himself. He asked the same questions he had asked dozens of times before, but this time Imran answered calmly, with steady breaths and clear eyes. When the doctor inspected his right hand, he found nothing. No burns, no redness, no nerve damage, no swelling. The skin was cool, healthy, flawless, like a hand that had never known pain. "It's impossible," he murmured, stepping back. "Your vitals are normal. Your scans are clean. There is absolutely no trace of trauma." A neurologist reviewed the results twice, then a third time. A burn specialist requested additional imaging. A psychiatrist observed quietly from the corner, searching for any sign of delusion. But every test returned the same conclusion. Medically, nothing had happened. But something had unquestionably happened. Layla stood beside her husband, tears sliding down her cheeks, not from fear this time, but from a relief so profound it left her trembling. "You're not hurting anymore," she whispered. "No," Imran replied softly. "Not in my hand. Not in my heart." In the hallway, he spoke with Father John Matthews. Witnesses said the conversation was brief, but carried the weight of years. "I blamed God," Imran admitted. "I thought he took my child. I thought he abandoned me." Father Matthews placed a hand on his shoulder. "He never left you. You were the one drowning in sorrow." Imran's transformation didn't come with bright lights or booming voices. It came with a quiet clarity, an understanding that the fire inside him had never been divine punishment, but the natural consequence of a grief he refused to face. By the end of the day, one truth was undeniable. Imran Malik walked into the hospital, a man consumed by pain, and walked out a man reborn. By December 2025, St. Gabriel Springs no longer resembled the fractured, anxious town it had been in mid-November. Something had shifted subtly at first, then undeniably. What began as a scandal, then a mystery, and finally a miracle had opened a door the community didn't know it needed. The Virgin Mary statue became the town's quiet center. Residents who once hurried past it now approached slowly, reverently. Flowers from Catholics, candles from Protestants, prayers handwritten by teenagers, and even folded notes left by members of the Muslim community gathered at the statue's base. What had been a symbol of division was now becoming a symbol of possibility. In early December, Father John Matthews, Imam Karim, and Pastor David Reynolds stood together for the first interfaith gathering in the town's history. A crowd filled the square. Christians, Muslims, skeptics, immigrants, lifelong locals, people who rarely shared the same space but now stood side by side beneath a cold winter sky. Imran was there too, standing quietly with Layla. His posture was humbler, his expression peaceful. Many expected Im to hide from public attention, but when the microphone was offered to Im, he stepped forward, not in pride but in vulnerability. "My pain didn't come from God," he said softly. "It came from the anger I carried, the anger that blinded me. The moment I admitted the truth, the fire finally left me. I don't know why the miracle happened, but I know it wasn't punishment, it was mercy." The crowd listened in absolute stillness. A woman from the Catholic congregation later said, "It wasn't just his hand that healed, it was all of us." By Christmas week, the statue, once desecrated, once surrounded by fear, had become a meeting place for reconciliation. Strangers prayed there, families reconciled there. A town that once braced for conflict now discovered compassion. And Imran, who once believed he belonged nowhere, began volunteering at the community center, helping new immigrants find their footing, offering the sense of belonging he once desperately sought. As the year closed, one truth lingered over Street Gabriel Springs. Miracles don't always break the laws of nature. Sometimes they soften the hearts of people. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Touched by Mary for more miraculous journeys of grace and healing.